So the issue of public benefit would of necessity need to look at issues of detriment as well, wouldn't it?
How are you going to determine, in your test, yes, your test requires it to be weighted against benefit. I don't think the UK test requires that, and you would have to determine and define what was detrimental or harmful, which the bill doesn't do. Then you would have to work out how you weighted that detriment or harm against any benefit. Is it substantially more than? Then you would have to have somebody who was impartial determined that issue. Otherwise, you run the risk of discrimination.
And if I could perhaps go to Mr. Ferriss, because of his role in New Zealand, you're aware that there is a public benefit test that applies in New Zealand with the Charities Commission?
Yes, I am aware of that.
And that's something that hasn't caused the Church of Scientology any difficulty in itself?
That's correct.
And would it be fair to say that would it be, in your view, implicit that in considering a public benefit test, you look at the good an organisation does, but it would also you weigh it against any harmful activities or any complaints about its activities in having an impartial body looking at the determination of the public benefit test?
It's not a natural assumption when you look at the public benefit that there possibly could be a public harm. For example, the Quakers in the 17th century were against slavery, and they were very unpopular. And they were persecuted, they were tortured, and even murdered in England and in the United States because of their views, their different way of preaching, their different methodology of their faith. And there, perhaps, they were very unpopular. They might have even been considered that their views against slavery were a public harm.
Sure. But Mr. Ferriss, in the context of the issue of the freedom to practice a religion, the freedom to express your beliefs or have those beliefs, that is still quite different from the issue as to whether you have a tax-free status or not.
The right to practice one's beliefs is a fundamental human right, correct?
And it's independent on whether you have tax-free status or not.
It is independent on tax-free status, but if you're going to then judge one religion, you'd have to judge all.
Sure.
You couldn't just say, well, we're going to single out this group because this group looks particularly bad at this point in time, because where would you be? I mean, if you were doing it with the Salvation Army, for example, back in the late 1800s, they were against alcohol. They were very active in England. And they weren't welcome here in Australia. They weren't welcome in New Zealand in the early 19th century because of their views against alcohol. They were beaten up and they were persecuted. So where do you go?
So, well, perhaps if I could ask Ms. Stewart, in terms of the Church of Scientology in Australia, would you agree with Mr. Ferriss that there is a distinction between the freedom of belief, the freedom to practice your religion, and having a tax-free status? There is a distinction between the two. You can have freedom of religion without having a tax-free status.
Yes, you can, Senator.
So there's not an issue there for you in relation to that. There have been a number of complaints from former members of the Church of Scientology, and you would have heard that today in terms of those complaints. Without going into the veracity of those complaints, would you be concerned of an organisation having a tax-free status if that organisation, if it was a systemic issue in that organisation in terms of people having difficulty in leaving the organisation or being coerced into doing things they didn't want to do? Is that the sort of thing? And again, I'm not asking you to comment on the veracity or otherwise. I just want to try and be as clinical and as objective as possible on this. But I'm not asking you the question, Ms. McBride, if you don't mind.
That's fine.
So, Ms. Stewart.
I think, Senator, excuse me. I think, Senator, one thing is what the media says, and then what real life is, and what documented evidence is, and I think that really is what it comes down to. Some people say some things, but is it true? Can it be proven? Is there proper evidence? Is there a whole evidence base of it or not? And we've provided already information packs earlier to the Senate addressing some of the allegations that were again repeated today. And we have different documents that we have already put in to the Senate, and we've had 2 right of replies published as well that address specifically those issues. So I think trial by media is one issue that we have seen in relation to the Church of Scientology, very much so, and I think that personally the laws of our country are pretty good, and that just in that issue, yes.
Sure. Can I just go back to the issue of Mr. Ferriss's evidence about the New Zealand umbrella, which is different from this bill, although it has, I think, similar concepts in terms of a public benefit, and I know Ms. McBride has said, you know, in terms of the structure and the overview is quite different, but we've heard evidence from the New Zealand Charities Commission. Are you comforted by what Mr. Ferriss has said of his experience, the Church of Scientology and New Zealand's experience in New Zealand, with respect to being subject to a Charities Commission, as is the case for all religions and all charities in that country, and being subject to a broad a public benefit test? Are you comforted by what Mr. Ferriss has said about the New Zealand experience?
Senator, I think yes, and also I look to the investigation by the Internal Revenue Service into the Church of Scientology, which also included the Church in Australia. They reviewed all of our documentation. It also includes the Church in the United Kingdom, and I know how much they provided over 1 million documents, and they travelled to various countries to investigate the Church, and so I would be quite confident.
Okay, so you're comforted by the structure that's been set up in New Zealand, which...
Well, I couldn't comment on that, Senator, because I actually am not familiar with the tax issue, and I haven't read the New Zealand charities.
Sure. The fact that your colleague hasn't had any real difficulty with the New Zealand setup is of some reassurance to you.
Definitely.
Yeah. And can I ask, some of the former members of the Church of Scientology have talked about the extraordinary fees they paid over, and I think one evidence earlier today, of between himself and his wife, $1 to $1.5 million. Again, I'm not asking you about that particular case, but are there instances where members of the Church of Scientology have either given, donated or handed over for courses amounts in the hundreds of thousands of dollars?
I can answer that.
Well, I wasn't asking you, I was asking Stewart.
Okay.
Good, I can answer that as well. Senator, I don't think courses within the Church of Scientology come to those sums. One thing on our church is that we operate on donations. We are an organisation that operates on donations, and I think that some of what you're asking me does fall outside the terms of reference of the inquiry here today. And I'm very happy to provide a full documented listing of how we fundraise, what happens to the funding, and I'm very happy to provide that to the Senate in writing afterwards.
Well, that would be useful. And also you talk about the work in terms of drug education, drug rehabilitation. Can you provide details of how much is actually spent on that, and in terms of the receipts, so your books are an accurate reflection of the income that the church receives, and does it also show how much money goes perhaps to the head organisation in the United States? Is that reflected in your books?
If I could just refer to Michael Gordon on that question, he's familiar with that.
Well, you've been very quiet. Can you tell us who else?
I believe the answer to that is yes, Senator. The books get done by accountants and
Sure. And they're publicly available?
I believe they are. Actually,
so you have no difficulty providing them. That would be good.
Senator.
Can I just ask another thing? I think Senator Cameron has some questions, but I've got a couple more. Do you think your auditing sessions, and this to you, Ms. Stewart, should be regarded as providing a public benefit? I know I've seen an expression that they seem to be more like a cross between personal counselling and Maoist self-criticism. In terms of how could that be seen to be in the public benefit? You charge for those courses. Is it a form of religious observance of prayer? And I note that the UK Charities Commission in their 1999 decision actually made reference to the fact that the auditing sessions are not were a factor as to why the Church of Scientology in the United Kingdom didn't get a tax-free status. And that's a common criticism I have about that's been provided in relation to auditing sessions.
Mr Chair, isn't that a point of order, given that that's outside the terms of reference of a tax bill? How is that relevant to a tax bill, Senator Xenophon?